All right, so I've been getting, I don't know, maybe hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of questions and messages on Instagram, comments here on YouTube. Brandon, what do you recommend we do post August 17th? When the NAR settlement changes go into effect, how do you think we should be structuring our listings? It's probably the topic that most people are talking about right now. And if you're like my market's already put this into effect. So everything I'm going to talk about in today's video no longer is theory. It's no longer my opinion. It's just what I see happening already in the markets where this is already happening. And so for whatever reason, there are a lot of people who see this the way in which it is. And then there's still, to be fair, and I understand, there's still a lot of people who are having a very, very, very difficult time seeing clearly through these changes and why the market is doing what it's doing. But it's my hope today that I'm going to present this information such that people that are still having a very difficult time with this can see things more clearly. That is my attempt for today. Because I'm having so many one-off conversations with people around this topic, I hope that this video will serve as somewhere where you can go back and reference. You could share this with your team leader, with your broker. You guys have conversations about this at maybe some company meetings. But that is just my hope. Obviously, you can do with it what you want. All right. So first off, there are a couple key concepts that we're going to go through before we get into this conversation. All right. Number one is, as a listing agent, you are a fiduciary for your seller. That is your responsibility when you list a home. Now, I know that you say, I know that already, Brandon. What does that matter? I'm going to go through these key concepts so that when we go through information later in this video, we can go back to these key concepts and you can connect the two. Because I think what's happening right now is most people I'm talking to are only talking about one point of the new NAR settlement changes at a time. And they only see it in a vacuum. They don't look at the whole. And so they get confused. So I'm trying to have you look at this as the whole, not in its individual parts, because that's where things get a little messy. Number two, here's a question for all of you. The question would be this: would you, as a listing agent, ever reveal your seller's lowest price that they'd be willing to accept to all of the buyers and all of the agents in the marketplace before you got an offer? In other words, if you were ever to list a house at, call it $400,000, in the remarks, would you ever put, I know that our list price is $400,000, but the seller is willing to accept $350,000? Would you ever do that to the seller? Again, most of you say, well, obviously I would never do that, Brandon. Okay, I want you to remember that then. We're going to come back to that point. You would never do it. I would never do it. We are a fiduciary for the sellers in which we serve. We would never, ever do that. Okay, fair enough. Number three, commissions have been decoupled. Well, what does that actually mean? That word's been thrown around in the media like crazy. It means two separate negotiations, two separate conversations. No longer is it one negotiation. No longer is it one conversation. There are buyer broker commissions and listing broker commissions. It is separate. It is no longer the same. Hopefully all of you are like, yep, that makes sense. I'm with you. I don't disagree. Okay, good. Number four, your job as the listing agent is to help the seller net as much as possible for the home. Yeah, I know that, Brandon. Okay, let's make sure you don't forget it then. Your job as the listing agent is to help the seller net as much money as possible for their home. And there's many different avenues to help that seller get to the point to accept an offer that makes the most financial sense for them. It makes the most sense from a terms perspective, makes the most sense from a timeline perspective. We're looking at all of those different variables when we're presenting offers to our clients, right? I think all of you would agree with that. And then number 5, I already mentioned this. There's no more theory. These changes are already in place in my market and some others around the country. Some of you, these effects are going in next week. Some are August 17th. But I'm not speaking any longer from here's what I think is going to happen. Here is what's happening. All right. So let's get into it. Number 1. All right. Number 1, the new listing structure. The listing agent is going to collect the listing agent compensation only. Okay. Think about this for a second. It makes no sense to get the seller to agree to an amount that they would pay a buyer agent up front. It makes no sense. Stick with me. I can hear you guys already. Yeah, but Brandon. Hold on. Let's get through this. I want you to think before the emotions kick in. I can't believe that we did it this way for so long, to be quite frank. It took me a long time to process this, but when I think about this, it makes no sense to have the seller, like I mentioned on the last screen, to go out to the marketplace, show their hand to say they are willing to accept less before they even have an offer. And if you think about that, well, yeah, that's interesting. Because the next question is, why were we making an offer to buyer agents in the first place? See, that's where a lot of agents are stuck on. Well, let's look at the truth. Don't get mad at me. I'm just speaking the truth. We did it because the MLS required some type of compensation to be entered into the MLS to participate in the MLS. That's why we did it. You couldn't put 0. You had to offer something. And then, yes, NAR later came out and said you can put $1 if you want. But let's be honest. Most brokerages, they didn't want to be seen as a discount brokerage. So their standard operating procedure was you just offer 3%. Some markets it was 2.5%, but there was a standard amount, and brokers wouldn't allow their agents to offer anything less than that. That's the truth. That's why we did it. Well, Brandon, and we're going to talk about this point in just a second. That being what we've believed for years and years and years and years and years, which is you have to offer compensation to buyer agents so that the property gets shown, it sells faster, sells for more money. It's better for the seller to do that. Well, that's not the case, and I'll explain to you why in just a second. So, number 1, when you meet with the seller, the new structure is only thing you're going to focus on when you're meeting with the seller, not to mention all the other legal implications that it opens up you as an agent and your broker when you start to look at offering co-oping compensation. I'm not going to get into any of that. There's a bunch of legal information that is now out there around why that may open you up for some legal issues. But even that aside, it just doesn't even make any sense. So when you meet with the seller, you're only going to secure and talk to the seller about what it is that you charge to represent them in the sale of their home. That's number 1. Number 2, you're then going to set offer expectations with the seller. What expectations? Number 1, that we are going to review any and all offers that reach your net proceeds goal, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. That we should never be in a world, this is our job as listing agents, as the expert, right? We need to communicate that, listen, all offers are good news. Let's review any and all offers. Let's be open to them and see what type of offers are being presented to see what you would net. So we're going to set that expectation, because the next thing we're going to say is the likelihood that when an offer comes in from a buyer's agent, that they're most likely going to ask for some type of compensation. because this is the other side of the equation, which I'm not going to get into too much on how to work with buyers. But we know just through some recent studies, I did my own study on Instagram, 90% of the agents in this industry do not believe that buyers will pay for their buyer agent compensation out of their pocket and thus going to ask for the seller to pay. I agree. So we just have to set that expectation with the seller to say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, unlike what it was like before, when we would collect all of the compensation and we would offer a part of that to the buyer's agent, you don't have to do that any longer. That now becomes a negotiation. And so when we get offers from other agents, it's likely that part of that buyer's offer will have the buyer agent that represents them offering for some type of compensation. We can negotiate that now, and it's somewhere between 1% and 3%. So let's look at this. The old way versus the new way. I'm hoping that when you see this, it is so crystal clear. All right, old way. Listing agent goes to a listing appointment. Listing agent collects compensation for the listing broker and the buyer broker at the time of the listing. That's what we've been doing forever, right? Then that listing broker would offer a portion of that commission to a buyer's agent for procuring the buyer. All of you know this already. That's the old way. The listing agent would earn somewhere between 2% and 3%. The buyer agent would earn somewhere between 2% and 3%. And the seller would pay somewhere between 5% and 6% in total real estate agent compensation. That's what's been happening forever. Here's the new way that it's already happening. The listing agent collects compensation for the listing broker only at the time of listing. And the buyer agent who submits an offer on behalf of their buyer includes the buyer broker compensation as part of the offer. The listing agent then earns 2% to 3% commission, like they always have. The buyer agent earns 2% to 3%, like they always have. And the seller pays somewhere between 5% and 6% in total real estate agent compensation, like they always have. The point is this. At the end of the day, things are very, very similar to how they are today. It's just how we get there is changed. It's no longer that you go and negotiate on behalf of a potential buyer agent that you have no idea if they're going to submit a good offer or a bad offer. We have no idea. We're not going to do that any longer. We're going to go and meet with a seller, and we're going to communicate, this is the type of compensation that I charge to represent you in the sale of the home, and set an expectation that when we get offers from other agents, that agent is going to ask for some type of compensation. Nobody works for free. It makes sense. And that buyer agent commission is now part of the offer negotiation process. Okay, now let's talk about the questions that I get from agents that still have a very hard time understanding this concept. Number one, offering a buyer agent commission upfront helps homes sell faster and for more money, right? Wrong. This is what we are all led to believe, myself included. This is incorrect. How do I know that this is incorrect? Well, this is already live in my market, ladies and gentlemen, and the listings in my market right now don't have any offer of compensation. Can't do it. Can't even put it in the agent remarks. Can't use the word compensation. Can't use the word buyer agent commission anywhere in the remarks. And guess what? Showing activity is exactly the same. The number of showings per listing, exactly the same. So that old argument of, well, if you don't offer a commission to buyer's agents, the seller's going to get a lot less exposure on the home. That is a myth. There's no data to support that fallacy. However, now markets like mine and others have factual data to say, well, there are no more listings that offer any compensation. And guess what? Showings are just fine. Offers are just fine. Homes are selling just fine. Why? Because the buyer agents are submitting offers with their compensation as part of the offer. And we're negotiating the buyer agent commission as part of the offer. It did not affect anything when it comes to the sale of the home. Nothing. So the argument that people have that are still making it today, well, people just don't understand buyer agent marketing. And if you don't offer a commission to these buyer agents, that the seller's going to get a lot less showings. That is BS. Not only for the reasons I just gave, but for the other part that a lot of agents get mad at me about. But here's the other part. Are you telling me that buyers shop for homes for their family based on how much their agent's going to get paid? I don't think so. I don't think, if you're being honest, that there is a home buyer on the planet who is going to put their agent's compensation before the needs of their family. I don't believe that will be the case. I just don't believe it. I don't believe there will be a buyer who says, well, if you're not getting paid, screw it. Doesn't matter if it's the right house for my family. If you're not getting paid, we're not buying it, period. Never going to happen. Buyers are going to just go to the listing agent if that's the case. And we'll talk about that in just a second. The buyer is not concerned with you as the agent getting paid. Let me assure you of that. Some of you can handle that. Some of you say, I can't handle that. That makes me mad. I'm sorry if that makes you upset. But are you telling me that you, as a home buyer with the limited amount of inventory that we have in today's market, if you found the perfect home for you and your family with the right school districts, with the right amenities for your family, you're telling me you're going to say no to that house because your agent wasn't getting paid? I just don't buy it. All right. Not only do I not believe that, again, it's already what's happening. So it's no longer theory. You can't get mad at that. That's what's happening in my market. None of the listings offer this, and yet showings are happening every day. Houses are selling just fine. All right. Enough of that. Number 2. But Brandon, what do I say when agents call me and ask if the seller is offering a buyer agent commission? Okay. Well, let me ask you this question. What have you said when buyer agents in the past have called you and said, hey, I see that you're listed at 400. Would your seller accept anything less? What have you said every single time for forever? You've said, put it in writing and I'll get it in front of the seller and I'll either get you an acceptance or a counteroffer. Isn't that what you've said all the time? Why would this be any different? Hey, is your seller offering any buyer agent commission? They're open to any and all offers. That makes sense. Put your offer in writing. I'll get it in front of the seller and I'll either get you an acceptance or a counteroffer. I have no idea what the seller would do. You've got to put it in writing. You've got to submit a contract like we've done always. Put your buyer agent commission as part of the offer and I will get it in front of the seller. Because again, remember, we've set the expectation with the seller that, listen, here's how offers are most likely going to come in, number 1. Number 2, we explain to the seller, listen, let's be open to all offers because it's all about the net. It's all about the net. In other words, if a home is listed at $400,000 and they get one offer for $350,000 and it has no buyer agent commission, and they get another offer at $425,000, but they have to pay a $15,000 buyer agent commission, which offer nets the seller more money? It's the one with the buyer agent commission. That's why we explain to the seller, let's look at all offers because it's about the net proceeds. So when an agent calls you and says, are you offering a buyer agent commission? That is how you respond, number 1. Number 2, put that in the agent remarks. The seller is open to reviewing any and all offers. Please put your offers in writing, submit it to this email address, and I will present it to the seller. You can make that part of your voicemail because you got buyer's agents calling you. Hey, is your seller, this is what's happening in my market right now. Is your seller offering a buyer agent commission? Well, make that part of your voicemail greeting, put it into the agent remarks, make it part of your automated email responses or automated text responses. And then this will become the norm. You'll stop getting the calls. I promise that's what's going to happen. Buyer agents will stop asking and they'll just start submitting their commission as part of the offer, and that will become the new norm. Number 3, well, Brandon, here's another one that someone brought up to me recently. Well, what if there's a seller who doesn't want to offer a buyer agent commission? What then? Because I love the what ifs, right? What if this and what if that? Agents come up with all these unique what ifs, one-offs that are the likelihood of them happening is so small, but they somehow come up with all of these. Well, remember, I go back to the first slide. The only way there'd be a seller who says, I'm going to put my feet in the sand. I saw in the news that I no longer have to pay buyer agent commissions. I'm not paying a buyer agent commission. I don't care how much money I'm going to net. There's no way I'm going to do it. Even if I get more money, I'm not going to do it because I don't have to anymore. And I saw that in the news. Well, the only way that happens is because the listing agent failed to set those expectations up front. Remember I told you? I just don't know of a seller, okay? Now we have to look at likelihood and probabilities. I don't know, and I've been in this industry for about 20 years. I have yet to meet a seller who has said to me, Brandon, they're so rigid. This is what I've not seen. A seller that's so rigid that they'd be willing to sell their home for less money just based on some arbitrary philosophy. I have yet to see it. I've yet to see it. I don't care if I make another $50,000. I'm not paying that agent $10,000. I mean, if you think about that, the likelihood of that is almost unfathomable. And so that argument I just don't see it ever playing out because you have to have, in order for it to play out, you have to have a seller who says to their agent, I know I get a lot more money in my pocket by paying that buyer agent commission, but I'd rather sell the house for less money than pay that agent commission. If you find one of those people, tell me. I just don't see that happening, especially after you've set the expectation to say, listen, we're going to market this property to any and all buyers. There's never a world, in fact, we can't not tell you about an offer, so we're going to be open to all offers. And the likelihood is that most of these offers are going to include some type of compensation if it comes from another agent. The seller's like, yeah, that makes sense. If I can net more money, I don't care if I have to pay a buyer agent commission. If it means I get more money, who would say no to that? Exactly. Number 4, what happens if the buyer goes directly to the listing agent? This is the next question I get. That's going to happen a lot more than it happens now. And so on most listing agent, listing exclusive right to sell contracts, there's now a spot for compensation due if the listing agent procures an unrepresented buyer. So maybe you have part of your compensation package when you take listings, you have a portion or a part of that package that says, listen, if another agent brings us a buyer, here's what my compensation looks like. If there is not another agent involved and I find the buyer for the home who is unrepresented, here's then what that compensation looks like. And you have that clearly articulated to the seller based on how the buyer comes to fruition. You talk about it up front. So maybe you charge a little bit more if there's a buyer that comes directly to you, unrepresented, because the seller, if you look at that, most likely would pay less than if another agent brought them a buyer. So the seller's rooting for you to find that unrepresented buyer. That just makes sense, right? So when we look at all these different scenarios, it's so clear to me that the way that we're structuring listings right now, that's already happening in my market, makes all the sense in the world. Because at the end of the day, here's what's going to happen. The seller's going to still end up paying 5 or 6% in total real estate compensation like they always have. The listing agent's going to collect their listing fee only. I'm not going to rehash the whole video to you, and set the expectation that buyer agents are going to want to get paid. Buyer agents are still going to get paid through the negotiation, somewhere probably between 2 and 3%. And buyers will still be able to have buyer representation through this new model the exact way I just laid it out. Some people, okay, you've seen EXP, you've seen Real, you've seen Next Home, you've seen these CEOs come out and understand this model clearly that I've just outlined in this video. But there are still a lot of people who are still having a tough time with this model that we're presenting for whatever reason. I don't know why. And again, it's just because it's change. We're going to end up pretty much in the same spot. How we get there is the only thing that's changed. And so obviously there are probably some things in here that you I don't know, have questions about, see things differently, we can have that conversation in the comments. Let me know. What questions do you have? What clarity do you need? Why does this not make sense? How do you see it? Again, I'm no longer speaking from here's what I think will happen. Our market put this into effect in July. We didn't wait till August 17th. It's already happening. So I'm just sharing with you what has already taken place. This isn't what I think will take place. So that's the perspective that I have. And so I'm curious what you're seeing or what questions you have.